Hi, I'm Allie. Join me as I create this Arizona bracelet based on 2 stitches and some embellishments. Remember, if you ever need the supplies or want the exact counts, look below the video in the description. We'll have a link there to get to our website to check out all those details. Remember also to comment below if you do any switches or changes to this design to help out other Potomac beaders. Go ahead and gather up your supplies and let's get started. So to get started with our Arizona bracelet here, the first thing that we're going to do is create a base of right angle to build off of. We're using 8OC beads for this, and you're going to use the length of your wrist depending on your clasp. I'm going to be using an infinite clasp with this beautiful turquoise Picasso to go with my 3mm African turquoise as we embellish the top. So to get started, I'm going to be using the gray wildfire in the size 8. I like to do that when I used mixed beads like gemstones and gloss together. Go ahead and sit the clasp aside, and we're going to start initially with our just single row of right angle weave. If you already know right angle weave, great. If you don't, what we're going to do is create a series of boxes like so with 4 beads. I'm going to pick up 4 beads and put them on a size 10 needle and let them fall down towards the base of my thread. If you want to do a stop bead, you can certainly do so. And what we're going to do then is sew back through the first 3 beads. So we're going to sew back through bead 1, 2, and 3 and bring our needle out prior to bead number 4. That creates our first little right angle weave box. You can see it has a top, a left side, a right side, and a bottom. We're going to add additional boxes onto this for that base. So each additional box is going to have 3 more beads. My thread is currently coming out the bottom of the right side of this box that we created. We're adding 3 beads and we're going to sew into the top of that bead. Bringing the thread and needle through then, you'll notice that you created another little box or a box of right angles, 4 right angles to get your sides. We're coming out of the left-hand side, which is our shared bead that was the right side of the previous box. To keep this growing and continuing to the right, we need to come out the right-hand side of the box. So with my thread coming out towards the bottom, I'm going to sew through the bottom bead. And then again, I need to come out that right-hand bead. So I'm going to sew up through the right-hand bead and come out. From here, I need to add 3 more beads for my next box. I'm going to share the right side of the previous box. The thread's coming out the top, I add 3 beads, and I'm going to sew into the bottom of the one my thread is coming out of. Look, I made another box, but I still need to get to the right-hand side of this box. So how to do so? This time the thread's coming out the top. I'm going to sew through the top bead of the box, and once again, coming out the right-hand side of the box. So you always want to make sure as you add your additional right angle units that you're always coming out of the right hand of the box. Whether or not that's the top or the bottom is going to reverse with each box that you build. Last time it was the top. Now as I build this box, it's going to be the bottom. As I sew through then over to the right side of the box always to get my next box on, this time it's coming out of the top. Adding 3 beads on, sewing into the opposite side of where your thread is coming out of, that right side of the previous box, we add a new box along with our 3 beads. From here, you sew through either the bottom or the top, depending on where your thread is coming out of, and once again, always exit through the right-hand side of the bead. So you're going to want to build these right angle units here, the whole length of your wrist, and then we're going to go in and we're going to pick up and do a little variation of Hubble stitch as we go in and do our jeweler's look for this Arizona bracelet along the sides. Once you have your base line finished, and again, you want it to right about touch at the back of your wrist, because by the time we add the clasp, that gives a little bit of wiggle room for you to go in and have a nice bracelet to put on and off. Now we are going to go in here, coming out our last right angle unit, and just like we were doing, we have it that we're coming out the right-hand side. Instead of going in and adding on more units, we're going to start to create the sides of our bracelet. To do so, I'm going to go through the bottom of that last right angle weave. I'm going to go through the left side, having circled the whole way around now, and then I want to come out through the top. If you're coming out the bottom, that's fine. You just want to make sure that your thread is exiting towards the lengthwise of the bracelet towards the additional side. From here, we're going to do a little bit of a Hubble stitch. So it's kind of a trade up that we are doing. We are going to add 2 15-0 beads coming out of the top now of our right angle weave. We're going to sew back through that same top bead that our thread is coming out of. Those 2 15-0s, we want to sit kind of to the top there, right above that 8-0 bead. And then what we're going to do is we are going to sew back up through bead number 1, that first 15-0 that we added. When we exit between the 15-0s, we're going to grab one of our light mint delicas and sew down through our next silver line gray bead. That kind of opens it up, and that delica is going to sit nice and in the middle, having a nice delica line to kind of have a polished look. After you're done your first unit here, we're going to continue and do our next unit. Go ahead and grab 2 more 15-0s. That's going to be bead number 1 and number 2. I'm going over to my next right angle unit to the top of that right angle unit. So you can see that bead there at the top. I'm going to go into the far side of that bead, kind of circling around, sewing back towards the first unit that I was working on. And that is going to be bead number 3 in my unit. You want to give a nice tight pull, and then we're going to sew back up through bead number 1, coming out prior to bead number 2 of those 15-0 beads. When you do so, you're going to add a delica, and then once again, sew down through bead number 2. And there you have that. From here, once again, 2 more beads get added. Going now to the third right angle unit, sewing back toward the second unit that we just completed through that 8-0 after adding 2 15s, letting that kind of lay right there. So back up through your first 15, coming out before the second, so in between those 2 15-0 beads. Give a nice little tight pull. Add one of your mint delicas and sew down through your second 15-0 bead. You are going to do this on both the top and the bottom of your right angle weave. You can see in our sample piece here that it's decorated and it just looks like this nice long line of almost soldered pieces with that bronze and silver. We're going to continue with those 2 gray 15s added and that mint right in the middle for a nice edge effect prior to going in and putting in our African turquoise. So we're going to sew the whole way down, adding in our Hubble stitch. And then when we get to the bottom, we'll connect and I'll show you how we're going to add our clasp for the first time around, and then we'll reinforce it as we embellish the top. Once you get to the end of the first row of that Hubble stitch, you can see there's a little bit of space in between. If that's driving you crazy, you can add an additional 15 in there prior to going in. So you'll add 3 15s and then just back through 2. That's up to you. But you can see as you go in and do the other side, it kind of pulls it a little bit tighter. So here we are at the end, and we're going to spin around and add the first side of our clasp. I'm coming out the last bead in those 15-0s. I'm going to sew through the 8-0 right below it. I'm going to take my thread and needle around that last right angle weave unit all the way to the end. Here at the end where the stop bead is, or the end thread, I'm just going to push it out of the way right now. And I'm going to sew through my infinite clasp end. Now, one thing to know with the infinite clasp end is that it is soldered. So it has a soldered end to it. So you know that when you're looking at it that the thread's not going to escape. If you do not have a clasp that you're using with a soldered end, I want you to use a wire guard for there. I put on 2 15-0s, then the end of my clasp, 2 more 15-0s, and I'm circling back through that same bead. Pull nice and tight, and that clasp will sit right there at the end. Now, I'm not going to reinforce this because I'll be coming back through reinforcing, but what I am going to do is go back down now the right angle weave, spinning around, and remember we want to come out the long side of our 8OC bead. So we embellish the top with our Hubble stitch. Now we are going to embellish the bottom, and you can see it turns a little bit and it curves. By the time you embellish both sides, it flattens it out. So you have that nice Hubble with the right angle weave base. So I'm going to come down doing the exact same thing, adding in, pushing that starter thread out, adding in 2 15-0s, sewing back through that same bead that my thread is coming out of, sewing through bead number 1, separating out basically bead number 1 and 2, adding my delicate in, and then sewing in through bead number 2, adding 2 more 15s. And you just want to make sure also that the thread isn't twisted there. Add 2 more of your 15s. So through the bottom bead there from the second unit in toward the first unit. So it seems like you're counterproductive and you're sewing away from the bead. And then you're going to sew up through, give a nice little tight pull, tighten it up, add your delica, sew down, and continue this opposite side. Like I said, it will start to kind of equal up, and you will eliminate that curve as you're looking for it. You also want to make sure that you're not pulling super tight on the needle. You want to pull on your thread as you're working with it. So I have 2 down and a bunch to go to decorate the exterior side of the bracelet. If you are getting done your project and you have to add thread, what you want to do is bring your thread in towards the interior of the project. So you can see I haven't finished this row yet, but I'm going to add thread towards the middle. That way, when I embellish the top with my 3mm beads, it is going to cover that thread knot. I'm going to take a new piece of thread and I'm going to tie it around the old piece. The bracelet, you're going to need about 6 feet of thread. If you don't like working with that much like me, you'll probably need to add thread. I'm taking a new piece of thread, tying it around the old piece, pulling that knot down toward the project, and then I'm going to tie those thread ends together. I still have the needle on my thread end, and I'm going to take that now and I'm going to sew it back in along the project a little bit further. So we have that knot there and the tail from the new thread, and I'm just separating it out because what I do is use my thread burner to burn the thread, and I don't want a lot of thread bunched up in one spot. So I separate out the thread ends. I'm going to take the one that's attached to my needle, burn that thread off, and then down flat towards the project, and then go in, make sure you're burning the right one, lift up your new piece of thread end, burn that down, and burn it towards the project. You want to be careful not to burn that piece of thread, or that whole process was in vain. So go ahead then and add your needle to your new piece of thread and continue on. Once you get to the opposite side, it's time to add your clasp. So just like we did on the other side, we're going to go back through that right angle weave. Now with this side, as we add our clasp, we will not be coming back down the bracelet to reach this point again. So we're going to make sure as we sew around the right angle weave and come on out and add our 2 15s on the side, that we make sure that we go through our clasp more than once. So we're going to add 2 15s. We're going to make sure, looking at the other side, that we are adding the clasp so that when we close it, it sits upright. So go ahead and add your beads. Then you're going to look at the opposite side of the clasp, and for me, I need to feed it on this way so that they line up. Do our 15s on the other side, and then once again sew in. So remember, we're going to do this and repeat the same thing 2 times. This is also your opportunity to try on the bracelet. You can easily add some right angle weave if you need to, and embellish and pick up that Hubble stitch on the sides. So this is a great place to see, does it fit and is the bracelet the length that I want it to be? Because sometimes it's a little bit hard with the right angle weave to judge it exactly as is. So here I have it. I'm going to try it on and say, does it fit? Yep, fits me perfectly by the time that's going in there. And now guess what? We get to have fun and embellish the top. For this, you can use a multitude of items. You can use 3mm like I did here with this multi-stone faceted 3mm round. In the sample piece, a little tiny one, I did 2mm bicones, so you can do it really blingy. And I'm going to do just plain round African turquoise beads. So I'm going to take my strand here, and you can be a little bit choosy because you're not going to use the whole 16-inch strand. And we're going to cut these open, pull them off the string. You can kind of pick them up at random, up to you. If you want to exclude some of the more brown, you can. If you want to include, I love inclusions and things that have the black, you can do that. It's a great thing with gemstones. You are going to pick up one of your round beads or your bicones or your 2 or 3mm bead. Coming out the right-hand top of the last box, I'm going to sew into the bottom of the left-hand side of that box, which is going to bring me out the top of the right side of the next box, because remember, we share it. See how I just use my hand to kind of pinch that down? If you do not like the look of the thread, which really disappears as you add in your beads, you can always use a 15-0 on either side of your bead. Pick up your next bead here along the path. Coming out the top of this unit of right angle weave, I'm going to sew into the bottom of the left-hand side. So I'm coming out the top right, sew into the bottom left, and give a nice tight pull. So once again, grab your next bead, sew into the bottom, pull your thread through, nice pull. So you can see how it's easily decorating the top of the piece, and when you lay it on, you have that nice kind of almost jewelers or Arizona style of turquoise and gemstones and silver bracelet. Once you're finished with the embellishment of the bracelet, you're back at this side where we have the tongue and actually our starter thread. So I'm just going to kind of move that out of the way. I'm coming out of the last 8/0, and we're going to use this opportunity to reinforce our clasp, going back through the 15s, going back through the tongue, back through the 15s one more time, and then back through the 8s. Might be a little tight, but I'm going to reinforce one more time as well. Back through the 15s, back through the clasp, back through the second set of 15s. And then once I get to the side here, my threads are matching up. I'm right next to gray beads and I have gray thread. So I'm just going to take these 2 thread ends. I'm going to tie them together into a knot. We're then going to take that original starter thread and we'll burn that off there. The thread that's currently attached to the needle, I'm going to take further into that last 8/0 seed bead of the right angle weave, and then further down into the project and just burn it off where it's between the last right angle weave units, so that way you don't see it as much. So you have the 2 pieces here, go in with your thread burner, burn them down short towards the project, and then burn them down flat against. If you do not have a thread burner, I would definitely recommend getting one. It's kind of a lifesaver, and I don't even have scissors now near me. It also, as it burns the thread, balls it up and makes it a little bit bigger at the end, which prevents that knot from slipping out. Once you're all finished, then you have your beautiful Arizona bracelet that is a nice collection of glass seed beads as well as gemstones. Again, you can use, if you want to, some crystals in the middle, some pearls, and really make it any style that you want, but it has that nice finish, almost like it is actually soldered look to it. Again, if you don't have an infinite clasp, use some wire guards and you can connect any clasp you want to the design and to the bracelet. Thank you again for joining me during this Arizona bracelet, which I also wanted to show as a choker, which would be a great design for that as well. If you do make any modifications or have any additional questions, go ahead and comment below the video. That helps us out as well as other Potomac beaders that may be working along with you. As always, don't forget to subscribe because you don't want to miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks for joining and stay tuned for our next inspirational design.